Today I'm going to talk about 3 things I've learned when trying to understand how to choose the location of a good property investment. 2 years ago, me and my husband bought a first apartment to flip and renovate to increase the value. And along this journey, we've truly started to understand the importance of location. My name is Linnea and I'm an architect who has worked on large-scale city transitions for the past 6 years. And now I'm trying to understand how I can harvest some of that large-scale insights into the small and graspable renovation of a home. Me and my husband, we're on a journey to try to see if it's actually possible to build a sustainable real estate business by renovating 11 homes. And along this journey, I'm going to try to document what I'm learning, what I'm seeing, and hopefully some of that will benefit you if you're on a similar journey or at least curious to start to see what it could mean to renovate and add value to your home.
Point 1. Where is demand increasing?
Okay, so for the first point, we need to try to zone in on where in the world are we actually going to start to look for a good property. And in our case, we had opportunity to choose between 2 different mid-sized Swedish cities. And mid-sized city in Sweden is roughly around 80,000 people to 150,000 people. And when we started to distinguish, okay, are we looking to find a place in city A or city B, what we went for was to try to understand how are these different cities growing? How have they been growing over the past 20, 30 years? Is it a place that is declining, or is it a place that is actually on a journey upwards and has been, or has a good trend at least for the past, let's say, 10 years? And for us, the city of Västerås compared to the city of Eskilstuna had a larger growing potential. And why we then went with that is probably obvious to everyone listening. Demand. If there is a greater demand, it's also more likely that the housing market will increase its value. It's obviously not 100% sure, because there is also the risk that if a city is growing, there might be a lot of new housing being built, and if you're building more than the demand is actually increasing, there is also the risk of there being too much housing, which means that the housing market will obviously not grow in relation to it. But we felt that in Västerås, what we could see, what we understood, there was a potential of having a good demand overall on a city scale. So point number 1, try to understand where is the demand increasing and how has that demand been increasing for the past, let's say, at least 10 years.
Point 2. Where is the city growing?
So for point number 2, we're going in a similar direction as with point 1, but we're zoning in a little bit more on the city scale. And this time what we're after is where, in what direction is the city growing. And for me and my husband, what we were looking for was, okay, where is new housing being built? Not where are new industry being built or where are new offices being built, because close to industry or close to offices are not necessarily areas that will create a lifestyle that people are after. So we started to look in the city, okay, where can we find new big housing development? And we found that in the Eastern Harbor, an old industrial area that was being transformed into housing, restaurants, stores, services, there was a lot of interest happening. We saw that there were new housing being planned out in an area called Finnslätten, but it was still very dominant and not dominated by offices. We could also see some smaller development popping up and some that were planned but quite far out, maybe 10 years down the line, that it would be interesting. So for us, in the end, when looking at these different areas, we sort of saw a potential in the direction of the Eastern Harbor, that we could see that the city is growing and this is where the investment is going. And in relation to where the investment is going, there could be an opportunity with adjacent areas to be impacted by how this new investment is actually happening. And for us, in our case, we didn't have a big budget to start with. So rather than actually looking at the area itself that was being developed, we started to look at those adjacent areas. What are next to it? What could be actually interesting in terms of having a good structure, a good foundation, a good quality of life, but with an opportunity to maybe have an increase in value due to this new neighborhood being developed. And in our case, it was just across the street, we found an area called Viksäng that seemed to have that potential. So we started to zone in and maybe think that this could be the place.
Point 3. What is the people's perspective?
But before deciding if this was the interesting space, it's really important to look at point number 3. And point number 3 is trying to understand the city from the people's perspective. In our case, we had never lived in the city, we had no prior knowledge of the city, so we really needed to ask around. We asked people at the bakery, at the swimming pool, I asked my new colleagues. We asked as many people as we could, what do you think of the city in general? But most importantly, 2 different questions. What are the areas that you would consider moving? And what are the areas you would never move to? And why would we ask those 2 questions? Well, the first question is to try to understand, similarly as with where the city is growing, where is the new housing development, and then being able to look at the adjacent areas. If you can pinpoint the most interesting areas of the city according to those living there, you could find similar opportunities, those adjacent spaces that are maybe cheaper than those areas with the highest demand, but still have a possibility to be impacted by the fact that there is a big demand in one area. The other question, trying to understand where no one is moving, is actually to avoid investing in a place that no one wants to move to. And this question is a little bit more complex because we need to add a factor of time. And in our case, we knew that we wouldn't have the house or the apartment for a very long period of time, which meant that we couldn't really afford to invest into one of these areas that are maybe not interesting today, but that could become interesting far down the line. So for us, it was important to understand where is no one interested in moving today, as we wouldn't be able to find a good investment in those areas for a short term that we had. The last thing that we could start to map out by asking these 2 questions is actually, what are the areas no one is talking about? Because even if no one is mentioning them when we ask these 2 questions, doesn't mean that they are not interesting locations to invest into. It actually might be those places that are most interesting. Again, going back to the Eastern Harbor, we understood this is where the city investment is going. The city center is sort of growing in this direction. Restaurants are starting to open, stores are popping up. When we asked where people wanted to move, a lot of people wanted to move to the Eastern Harbor because it's also close to the big lake that is next to Västerås. And again, when we looked at those adjacent areas and Viksäng that we had identified earlier, we also realized that no one talks about Viksäng. It's a place that no one dislikes or loves, but when we walked around, we started to realize, talking with people, that it's a place that people move to and stay. And when people move to a place and they stay there, it's also an indication that this might actually be a place that has a good quality of life as a foundation. In other words, it could be a place that has the potential to grow in value as this adjacent area is becoming more and more interesting and being invested into. So for us, when we try to find our home, which is actually this one, the home I'm sitting in right now, and in the next video I will definitely take you around, show you all the places, show you how we have transformed this from being a very, very rundown place to a place that gives us a lot of well-being, and hopefully also the next owner. We honed in and started to look in Viksäng where is the best opportunity that we could find. So those were the 3 things. Understand in what city or on the countryside or what you're after is demand increasing. Point number 2, when you kind of circle in on one of those areas, where is the investment going in that place? So in a city, for example, you can look at where is new housing being built, and in relation to that, stores, restaurants, etc. And you can look in those areas, but ideally actually in the areas adjacent. And for the 3rd point, you really need to understand the city, if it's a city, from the people who live there's perspective, because people who live there often have a better understanding of the city than you can get by looking at the map or just looking at where new development is going on. That's what it is for today's video. If you have any other advice or how to choose a good location for your next property investment, please share it in the chat and I would love to talk with you over there. In the next video, I'm going to show how we actually picked this particular flat by looking at the floor plans of different opportunities. As an architect, I always look at where is the opportunity in the floor plans, where can we make small changes that can dramatically transform the feeling and the life within an apartment. So see you then.